Today we'll be exploring the Gila River watershed, an essential lifeline for the state of Arizona. The Gila River watershed is a very important region in Arizona and New Mexico, being labeled as the world's first officially designated wilderness area. The river originates in New Mexico's Black Range, flows through Arizona, and empties into the Colorado River. The Gila watershed covers a large land area spanning 155,400 square kilometers. Starting in the lower elevations, the land is dominated by desert shrublands and grasslands. As we move into higher elevations, the landscape begins to change, transitioning into semi-arid grasslands, where more moisture allows for a greater variety of plant life. Moving on, agricultural lands play a significant role in the watershed, particularly in southern and central Arizona, around Phoenix and the Gila River Indian Reservation. Here, irrigated croplands flourish, producing water-intensive crops like alfalfa and cotton. Beyond the farmlands, rangelands dominate large portions of the watershed, particularly in the mid-elevation areas. These lands support cattle grazing, an important part of Arizona's economy and cultural heritage. Though often overlooked, wetlands and riparian areas are vital to the watershed's ecosystem. While limited in size, these areas, found along the Gila River and its tributaries, serve as critical habitats for wildlife, offering refuge for birds, fish, and other species that rely on these water sources. And finally, we come to the human footprint on the landscape, urban and developed areas. The cities of Phoenix and Tucson, along with smaller towns like Florence and Safford, have grown extensively, transforming parts of the watershed into urban centers. Roads, infrastructure, and industrial development have reshaped the land, bringing economic opportunities, but also new challenges in managing resources and environmental impacts. Looking at water quality, some of the main issues stem from agricultural practices as well as urban areas. Elevated levels of ammonia, nitrate, and phosphorus have been observed further downstream in the river, which has led to eutrophication and decreased dissolved oxygen levels. There are noticeable differences in water quality along different portions of the Gila. In the upstream regions, there are typically lower concentrations of pollutants due to reduced anthropogenic activities. In the regions downstream of urban areas such as Phoenix, there have been significant levels of heavy metals, pesticides, and nutrients observed, mainly attributed to urban runoff and agricultural return flows. The Gila River is primarily fed by snowmelt from the mountains of southern New Mexico as well as rainfall during wet seasons. The higher flow rates in this river are seen primarily in the late winter/early spring as snowmelt begins, and then in July and August when rainfall is at its peak, as seen on this graph from the United States Geological Survey. Aside from natural average precipitation, due to the watershed being primarily in a desert ecosystem, monsoons are a common occurrence. These periods of intense rainfall often lead to flash flooding of the watershed area, and thus are an ongoing concern of many scientists, industries, and citizens of the area. The Gila River covers a large region which includes several municipal regions, 7 indigenous districts, and 2 states. Roughly 6 million people call this watershed home, which over the 60,000 square miles is roughly 100 people per square mile. The cities of Phoenix and Tucson are included in this area, which have a total population of just over 2 million people. This means that around 2/3 of the population in this watershed are in smaller towns or rural areas.
The stakeholders in the Gila River include urban and rural residential communities, local indigenous groups that have faced many water rights issues in the past, and several government agencies, including the U.S. Forest Service, the Arizona State Land Department, the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, and various government departments in both Arizona and New Mexico. The Gila watershed faces many challenges related to funding. Municipalities have typically taken most of the financial burden, but state and federal agencies also play an important role in funding. But in recent years, the local governments have experienced more pressure to pay for infrastructure maintenance due to the Republicans cutting funding. Moving on to the history of the Gila watershed. Before European arrival, indigenous groups lived in the Gila River Valley and had developed extensive farming and irrigation infrastructure. The first European irrigation canal diversion was in 1871, and it mirrored the ones previously created by the indigenous groups. The Coolidge Dam was built by the Bureau of Indian Affairs from 1924 to 1928, and it was to supply irrigation water to agricultural lands in the watershed. In 1925, a U.S. Water Commissioner was appointed to the watershed. Non-government organizations have also had an impact. In 1970, various conservation organizations fought against the channelizing of the Gila and the construction of a dam, and they required the engineering company to provide an environmental impact statement. The Growing Smarter Initiative is a citizen-mandated law made in 1998 to, quote, strengthen the ability of Arizona's communities to plan for growth, acquire and preserve open space, and develop strategies to comprehensively address growth-related pressures, end quote. This led to the implementation of various land suitability analyses which consider the effectiveness of a piece of land at accomplishing the goal of the proposed development. In 2004, Arizona created a Water Settlements Act, which is a piece of federal legislation settling the Gila River Indian community's water rights claims and other concerns.
The GRIC is also leading restoration efforts along the river. They're working to restore the river's natural environment by planting native plants, removing harmful species, and cleaning up the water. For example, they've been restoring the riparian zones, which are areas along the river banks that help stabilize the soil and support wildlife. These projects have already improved water quality and are still ongoing, with the GRIC continuing to care for the water. Another important effort is the Gila River Watershed Partnership. This group brings together local farmers, governments, environmental groups, and the GRIC to work on water conservation. They've made improvements by using drip irrigation and other techniques to use less water in farming. These changes have already helped save water and improve the environment, and the group continues to meet and find new solutions. To help with the drop in groundwater levels, there are groundwater recharge projects in place. Water from the Gila River is pumped into the ground to refill the underground aquifers. This helps store water for use in dry times. Other efforts like harvesting rainwater and recycling water for farming are also in place. These efforts are already helping, and they continue to make sure there's enough water for everyone in the future. Finally, the Central Arizona Project, or the CAP, created in 1985, developed drought contingency plans to manage water shortages. These plans include water sharing agreements where cities, farmers, and the Gila River Indian community work together to share water during these times of drought. The CAP also set up water banks, which store extra water in wet years to use during dry years. These efforts have already helped reduce conflicts and ensure that everyone gets access to water when it's needed most. These plans remain crucial as droughts continue to impact the region. These ongoing efforts are helping the Gila River watershed work better for everyone who depends on it, whether it's agriculture, cities, or the environment. Some of these programs have already shown significant success, and others will keep improving to ensure the river stays healthy for the years to come.
When assessing the current state of the watershed, there are some key factors to keep in mind. First is the inevitable impacts of climate change on flow timing and quantity. Global climate change has and will continue to alter the river system by changing water quality, quantity, and availability for both human use and the environment, and consequently must be factored into decision-making processes. The Gila River receives most of its water flow from glaciers and snowmelt, meaning as temperatures increase, there will be changes in flow. Projections have indicated a potential decrease in mean flow by 8% for the period of 2021 to 2050, relative to the observed flow from 1951 to 2012. These projections took into account both historic drought and pluvial episodes for the watershed over time. Other projections suggest that snow will melt earlier in the year, leading to earlier peak flow. Climate change is also expected to increase the magnitude of high flow events, and typically the summer represents a low flow period, acting as an aquatic and terrestrial stressor, and is now expected to be prolonged. Lastly, because the floodplain will be inundated less, alluvial aquifers will not be replenished as frequently, and both surface water and groundwater levels will decrease. Increased warming and more frequent droughts increases the risk of intense forest fires. These fires cause decreases in water quality due to sediments and increased runoff. Therefore, groups such as the Upper Gila Watershed Partnership, with plans to continue evaluating wildfire-derived sediment and their impacts on infrastructure, provide some recommendations. These include developing fire management plans with rural districts, prioritizing vegetation management in at-risk areas, and removing certain flammable invasive plant species. In terms of integrated watershed management, the Gila Watershed Partnership is an organization that has completed an analysis and created recommendations for further steps for the Gila watershed. They work to implement projects regarding the restoration of the watershed and the education of individuals impacted. This partnership has aspects of integrated watershed management as it focuses on multidisciplinary approaches to water management that include all relevant stakeholders. This organization focuses on the individuals and residents impacted by watershed management practices and provides various recommendations for education and outreach initiatives that could be implemented. By providing data and recommendations for environmental management, both on the individual and industrial scale, the Gila Watershed Partnership displays aspects of integrated watershed management. Lastly, as they intend to repeat watershed monitoring every 5 years to gather more relevant data, they also practice adaptive and iterative processes. Through water rights settlements with local Indigenous communities and the Restoration Act, management is on track to reconcile with historic injustices relating to water allocation, but more work can be done. Some challenges do exist in the management of this watershed, including overallocation of water resources, which leads to increased water stress, improper funding for infrastructure maintenance, and differences between agricultural and urban water needs. An ideal management system would be more coordinated and take into account a wider variety of these perspectives. While proposals for increasing available water for urban centers through diversion or water treatment continue, we propose a few other recommendations. One step to improve the watershed management would be to provide more of a voice to local and Indigenous communities, ensuring that all stakeholders have a say in the watershed management. Practices such as hiring local labor and working with impacted municipalities and farmers on both restoration and future development plans would provide more diverse perspectives on the use of the watershed, examining ecological, economic, and social priorities. This is especially important as currently, most of the priorities consider economic factors and private sectors hold more power in the water allocation process. Additionally, water monitoring and assessment programs, such as those of the Gila Watershed Partnership, should continue in order to ensure accurate and relevant information from which to make decisions. However, due to recent decreases in support for environmental agencies, concerns do exist around how natural resources, including water, will be managed in the future.
The Gila River watershed is not just a critical water source for Arizona, but a lifeline for agriculture, communities, and ecosystems throughout the region. Its changing nature, driven by increasing water demands, climate change, and frequent droughts, present many ongoing challenges. However, the collective efforts of the Gila River Indian community, governments, farmers, and environmental groups are making a significant impact. Through collaboration, conservation, and innovative solutions, the watershed is adapting to these challenges. And as we move forward, it's clear that the continued efforts will be needed to preserve this vital resource, ensuring the Gila River can support future generations while maintaining the balance between human needs and environmental health.